I think we're live. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Healthy Living Live. I'm Chef AJ, and today we are going to be talking to Dr. Frank Sabatino, who is the medical director of the Balance for Life Health Retreat in Deerfield Beach, California. Welcome, Dr. Sabatino.
Deerfield Beach, Florida. Deerfield Beach, Florida.
Oh, I say Deerfield Beach,
Florida. You're such a Californian. You see how you are? Okay, that's fine. That's okay. I'll go to California, too. It's okay.
Oh my gosh, I said California. I didn't even know there was a Deerfield Beach, California. That is hilarious. Well, you are really the best kept secret in the plant-based movement. I didn't have the privilege of meeting you until March. How were you not on our radar all these years? Have you just been
I was doing the work. I'll tell you what's interesting. A lot of your viewers know people like Dr. Alan Goldhammer, and they know Dr. Joel Furman. They know these people in the field. I was doing lectures and they were coming to seminars where they were in school. They were still students when I met them. And so now they're luminaries in the work that they do. But it's so interesting because we know each other close to 40 years, all of those docs. So we're in a kind of a tight circle, and it's just the way it is. There are many people who know me and many who didn't. That's just the way it went down, you know.
Well, we hope many more.
We were in the trenches doing the work, that's for sure. When you look at the fast food industries, they learned a long time ago that by putting extra salt and oil and sugar in these refined products, it would trigger a certain amount of craving and attachment to these foods because they stimulated what we call the brain reward cascade, which some people have referred to as the pleasure trap in the human brain. And what happens is these substances trigger responses that we associate with a certain degree of pleasure. And so the bottom line is when you have those foods that have become a part of you over a long period of time, you do have a lot of problems, not only regulating weight and health, but you have a lot of problems with having craving and addiction to those products. So we find that by taking away the salts and the cooked oils, which also tend to be very inflammatory, creating a lot of irritation and inflammation in the body. It's amazing how quickly food addictions, food cravings will change, and people are in a more balanced place to really appreciate the taste of good food and good quality plant-based foods. Salt is a classic example. The more you use it, the more your taste become blunted. So you lose the ability to taste effectively, so you need that much more stimulation before you can taste anything. How many people do you know, and our viewers know, that before they even taste their food, they got a salt shaker going? My father was like that. And the dialogue always was, oh, the food is tasteless. And I said, Dad, the food's not tasteless. You are. Because you can't taste anything till it exceeds this incredible level of stimulation. One of the beautiful things we see with fasting, and it's a classic example, your taste becomes so sensitized when you fast that when you break a fast, you can have a piece of romaine lettuce, plain romaine lettuce, and people will eat this lettuce and they'll wax philosophical for, oh, this lettuce. And they're tasting things that they didn't even know that they could taste. So these foods are constantly blunting our ability to be sensitive to the beautiful taste of natural foods. They're triggering addictions and cravings. They're triggering inflammation and weight gain. So we find that by stepping back from that, and the truth is, there's different ways to cook and saute. You don't need that. You can use vegetable broth and balsamic vinegars. And you know, as a chef, there's so many ways to, with herbs and spices, to create remarkable flavors in foods without having to salt everything to death. And so, you know, it's a little bit of a strange and foreign step at first. But once you do it, it's amazing how clear and how clean and how open you become to all the plant-based foods. So much better.
It's amazing when you see kids that have been raised the way your kids were, or like Dr. Goldhammer's son, Gar. They don't have cravings. They don't have acne. They don't have weight problems. They virtually never see a doctor, you know, unless they fall down and break their arm or something. It's just incredible what's possible if parents would just get on board. You know, growing up.
Think about it, I had a family of 5 children. Their whole childhood, our medical bill was $0.
Wow.
I mean, when you think about that, it's so mind-blowing because in America, generally speaking, by the time a child is 18, they've been through 10 to 20 rounds of antibiotics, typically in America. And I mean, it's bizarre. It's ridiculous.
That's unbelievable. One of the things, you know, you were always on my radar. I mean, I knew your name, you know, for years. I heard you mention, I didn't know what you looked like. I didn't know really where you were. You know, it was one of those things. Yeah, I guess someday we'll get together or whatever. But then I believe it was might have been last December even, that I was on a plane coming home from True North reading a magazine, and you had written an article on food addiction. And I'm like, this guy gets it. This guy totally gets it. Talk about it. I mean, do you think it's real? Is it a problem? Because so many, this is what I deal with in my daily life, working with people that I believe suffer from food addiction, which is, of course, refined food addiction. They're not addicted to mango and, kale. But how often do you see this in your practice, and how long have you known about this?
I think it's all over the place. I think it's so much more than people think that it is. And here's the reason why. I mean, we have an inborn ability in our body and our brain for the release of a set of transmitters that are lumped under the heading of what's called the brain reward cascade, meaning that we have the ability to experience pleasure from the simple acts and joys of life, whether it's a hug of a mate, a tasty food, a sexual experience. So we have that ability. And the bottom line is the neurotransmitter that's the common denominator of that pleasure is something called dopamine. So dopamine is kind of the pinnacle of this cascade. And so whether you eat something sweet or whether you have a sexual experience, down the line, that dopamine is released, and it's also released in your memory centers of the brain. So you will remember that pleasurable experience. Here's the problem. Sometimes that because of a lot of eating of a lot of junk food, or not sleeping well, or having stress, or, doing things that are abnormal lifestyle patterns, you can distort that chemistry of the reward cascade, and you get to a place where you no longer feel pleasure from the simple acts of life. And you have something in the field of addiction that is called the reward deficiency syndrome. That means the person can't experience that routine reward from the simple things of life. But when you can't experience pleasure, you start becoming irritable. You start having feelings of anxiety, depression, even isolation, loneliness, and no brain wants to feel that. So the body's going to do whatever behavior or substance it can do to jazz up that brain reward. And that usually leads to the 5 major forms of addiction. And that, of course, is food, drugs and alcohol, sex, risk-taking, which used to be called gambling, and then what we call process addictions like shopping and internet and all of that. The problem is with food addiction, it's a little bit different than everything else, because you don't really have to shoot heroin, but you got to eat 2 to 3 times a day. So if you've got an issue, and now a good question is, why would someone choose one of those addictions over another? And I feel that has a lot to do with our environment and how we even grow up. The difference with food addiction is that, you have to eat 3 times a day. And the bottom line is that means not only is it important what you're eating, but you have to understand sometimes the context of why and when you're eating. What are you using food for? Because so many people that are trying to solve problems, even on an emotional level, because of that reward deficiency, are doing and using food to create some degree of comfort in that sense of isolation and anxiety and depression. So if you're doing that, it's very hard to create a normal relationship with food. And so on some level, you've got to address that piece in addition to eating healthier foods. Now, the nice thing is, if you get rid of the addictive substances in the foods that we're recommending, like salt and oil, dairy products, which can have an opiate-like addictive quality, you allow that brain and body, that whole chemistry, to kind of calm down a little bit. But that's where you still have to be mindful. You have to have some sense of what does that food mean to you? What are you using it for? And there may be a little personal work that has to go on to unravel what's driving your addictive food use. And so that's why I believe that really when you look at people with weight issues, I think that's a much bigger piece than we give it credit for. I think there's a lot of use of food in a way to create comfort, to create distraction, to deal with emotional issues in our lives when we need to find other tools that help us do that so we can get back to a normal relationship with food. Let's face it, what food becomes a friend in the night. It doesn't talk back. It's always there. It's just like you sit down with your tub of ice cream and you can just kind of go mindless. And the bottom line is you don't get any closer to personal truth. And it's hard to create a normal relationship with food unless you address those issues to some degree.
Right. So not just what you're eating, but maybe what's eating you as well. Huh?
Yeah, that's a very big piece. I mean,
right.
Think about it. Logically, everyone knows if you don't eat crap, you're going to feel better. The question is, we keep making that choice. Why? And because there's addictive quality in food, and there's addictive quality in our brain, trying to find peace and serenity and comfort and things that we're not getting in our relationships or the way we interact in our lives and in our world. That becomes important to some degree. It really does.
Well, something like 90% of all diets fail. Do you think it's because they're missing that piece of food addiction, and they're just telling people to moderate the use of unhealthy foods?
Not even that. It's even worse. They've come from a place of restriction. They tell them, don't eat this. It's all about, deprivation. No brain wants to feel deprived. So if you create a model of a diet that's a deprivational model, of course, someone may be able to do that for a few minutes, lose a few pounds, but what's going to happen? They're going to go right back to the old ways. So that's one of the beauties of this way of living, that what we're trying to teach people, because you can eat volumes of food. You have this feeling of satisfaction while having very low calorie density. So it's really affecting us in such a positive way, but you don't walk around feeling empty and deprived. You feel satisfied. And so that's a very important piece in terms of eating this way. And then it will allow you to maybe stay on track to do other personal work. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because this is a big thing, even in the field of addiction. When people go into addiction programs, those programs are not treatment programs per se. If you go 30 days to some place with food addiction, that's just stabilizing your food use. You have to do the work of dealing with what's driving all of that. And so by eating the way we're recommending and doing a little bit of, conscious personal work cognitively, you can come to an incredible place of balance with food use and over time be remarkably healthy. Because think about this. I would say that food addiction and the abnormal use of food that way is tied directly into the most major pathologies we have, like diabetes and heart disease and so on. So you could make the case that addiction is the number one killer, not heart disease and diabetes and stroke. You can make the case that food addiction and addiction in general may be the most significant health problem that we suffer with as a culture.
Yeah, I agree. I love how you said no brain wants to be hungry. And that's why I see so many people on these strict weighing and measuring calorie counting programs have success initially, and then they end up gaining more weight back because you can't go hungry very long.
AJ, dieting is a $70 billion industry with a 95% failure rate. There is nothing else on this planet that would tolerate that level of failure and inefficiency for the money that people are investing and becoming hopeless in the process. It's ungodly. The truth is, there's so much hope in this whole idea of regulating weight if you approach it from the standpoint of eating those things that will give you satisfaction, that give you that opportunity to feel satisfied while you get on with your life. Understanding that we want to eat foods that eliminate the sense of deprivation. When you sit down and eat, if someone passes by and you're eating a salad, I've seen this. People will stop. They can't get over the size of they can't believe that you can look the way that you do and eat the salad the size of the bowl that you're eating, because it blows their mind. They were told from the get-go that, you got to have this much food on a plate, because if you don't, you can't. And it's a ridiculous model that has absolutely driven people insane. And not only that, it's incurred so much failure in people's lives and so much hopelessness. And I'm here to tell you that it's incredibly hopeful and it's incredibly straightforward to be more successful. Do you have to make an application? Do you have to be consistent? You do, but it gets easier over time.
That's terrific. And what you say about calorie density is so true. It's like Dr. Steve Lewenda calls it the magical buffet. It's like every day is Christmas because you get to eat so much delicious food and you don't feel deprived.
Hey, I grew up in an Italian household. I love to eat. I'm never going to stop eating. So when I found this way that I could eat volumes of food and maintain health and leanness, it was amazing. It was a revelation. I mean, it's a revelation. It's an epiphany. So really, within even a week or two, so much change already occurs with sensitivity. I mean, it's remarkable. It doesn't take long. It just takes being consistent. So what I'm saying is, you can't do SOS for one day, eat the way you were eating the next 2 days, go back to SO. You've got to give it a period of, a week or two to really let that change take place. But it takes place pretty quickly.
You talk about the change that takes place in neuroadaptation, whether it's in the brain or the taste buds or both, but then people go back to the same environment that often made them fat and sick. You know what I mean?
That's part of the addiction problem. There was a book written many years ago by a psychiatrist, one of my favorite people, Thomas Saz, and he wrote a book called The Myth of Mental Illness. But he wrote another book. But he wrote another very small book that people don't know about, and it's called Ceremonial Chemistry: The Ritual of Drug Taking in America. Every addiction has a ritual attached to it. So there are places that are triggers. There are experiences that are triggers. So if you take a cocaine addict and you put them in one room of a house and another room away from them that they can hear, and you tap a razor blade on the end of a mirror, which is how they were doing lines of coke, just that sound will trigger that addiction. So if you think about the fact that you may have places where you eat or where you've cheated or where you've done this, and it's amazing because those environments will trigger the very craving for the things you're trying to avoid. That's what makes addiction in human beings so complicated, because we call that linkage. You get up in the morning, you have a cup of coffee. You get up in the morning, you have a cup of coffee. You get up in the morning, you have a cup of coffee and a cigarette. Within a few days, the smell of coffee will trigger all the craving for cigarettes. We call that linkage. So that happens all the time in our behavior. And so you've got to look at where those spaces and triggers are sometimes. And you need to kind of break the connection or create something different in that environment, or sometimes just step away from that environment for a period of time. You know, you got to look at the nervous system almost like a tapestry. And over time, all the choices we've made created kind of pathways and lines and patterns in that tapestry. So now all of a sudden you want to do something different. Well, those new choices have to be given some opportunity to weave their way into your behavior, because your body's naturally going to try to follow the old familiar roads. So breaking the setting, changing the environment, giving new choices a chance, and all of a sudden, as you do it more and more, that new healthy food now becomes part of your behavioral repertoire. But you had to give it a chance to weave its way into the tapestry of your own nervous system. It's very, very important.
So there's a few substances, and these are not things that exist in nature. Our ancestors didn't use them, that I find a lot of people have trouble with. And the argument is, well, they don't have any calories. They're not causing me necessarily to gain weight. And I'd like to know your take on them. One of them is Diet Coke or any of the diet sodas. One is chewing gum, and one is caffeine.
Well, you know, when you look at diet sodas, which also have caffeine, so it's not like they don't have caffeine. Caffeine is an interesting substance because it creates this routine, this roller coaster of stimulation and depression. And it's very important for people to realize that, and this is a very simple thing, and we've only known it for 3 or 4 centuries, whatever goes up has to come down. You know, most of us are living lifestyles where we're not burning the candle out at both ends. We're cutting the candle in 3 or 4 places and burning it out at 6, 8, and 10 ends. We got so much to do with work, with kids, with family. So we don't quite feel ourselves, and we need that boost. So we get up in the morning, we have a cup of coffee, maybe you have something refined with sugar or whatever, and you get a little bit of a boost. The problem is whatever goes up has to come down with equal and opposite force. So the body's going to crash. So it's very important to realize that even in Diet Cokes, caffeine, coffee, you have to understand that you're feeding this roller coaster of stimulation and depression. And the worst of these are energy drinks, which are the worst because they have the largest amount of caffeine. So the bottom line is you got to know that all stimulants by their nature are reinforcing depression. And that depression is in the endocrine, the hormonal system. It's actually causing your thyroid and adrenal glands to be suppressed. The problem is the thyroid and adrenal glands play a major role in the metabolism of sugars and fats and weight. So if you exhaust those tissues, those organs with these stimulants, it's going to make it harder and harder to lose weight and very difficult to keep it off. And so while it looks like it's nothing, while it looks like it's a non-caloric, simple thing, what do I care? You're reinforcing underlying physiological depression, and that's problematic. And then gums and things will have artificial sweeteners, and they'll have other things just like in diet sodas. You got high phosphorus content that can cause disturbances of mineral instability. So there's a number of things with those that really don't have a place, because while they look like they're not doing much, they're actually very subtly creating some very profound changes in chemical toxicity and this roller coaster of stimulation and depression. which can affect the weight pattern across time.
And isn't it really bad for the bladder? I always hear that from urologists, that caffeine, coffee, all that stuff, alcohol, really, really bad for bladders.
Yeah, because you're pushing that through. That's why with those things, you'll have increased urinary output. You're putting a lot more load on liver and kidney. And so my feeling is there's no place for it. And the bottom line is what that means, though, is that we've got to get to that place where we're regenerating our energy reserve so we don't need to depend on that roller coaster of stimulation and depression. And it's a culture that doesn't look at that. We're just too busy. We got to get it going. We got to get something done. We got to get it on. And the bottom line is when you get away from those chemicals and you start eating the way we're recommending, it's amazing how your energy levels go through the roof. You don't need stimulants. You don't need to get on that roller coaster of stimulation and depression.
What do you think the main challenges people face when they're trying to lose weight?
I think many of the things we've talked about. I think there's issues with peer and family pressures. I think the glut of foods that they've been exposed to that have created such profound levels of addiction. I think some not adopting some of the lifestyle changes that we're talking about, not being active enough, not taking time to handle stress more effectively. So the things that bring us out of balance will tend to be things that drive us to seek comfort and balance in behaviors like food use. And so you've got to look at that. The ways that we've been inundated with these foods that have created addiction and craving. And that's why we talk about putting the salt, oil, and sugar down for a period of time, getting away from that. So I would say they're cultural things and how we socialize and peer pressures in our families and friends, the time that the ways that we're trying to create comfort and balance in our own lives, the ways that we move, the ways that we handle stress, the ways that we create healthy relationship with ourselves. I mean, we're brought up, many of us, if you think about it, what's one of the biggest addictions today? Probably cosmetic surgery. So you get this sense of a lack of self-worth. It's almost like they're giving you the signals that you're not good enough unless you do this or that. There's a lot of pressure, and some of those pressures are greater on women, without any question. And so the bottom line is all of those things feed this process of having a difficult relationship. And then just the fact that we've been addicted to some of these foods over many years of our lives. And you've got to take that step back to break that connection. And so, that's going to take a little bit of work. It's going to take a little bit of mindfulness. It's going to take a little bit of self-love and self-worth to look at what it is you're trying to achieve. And I tell people, when you're trying to create a goal, I don't care if it's a business or a weight goal or a health goal, take a good look. What is it you're trying to achieve? And what are the factors that are going to lead to that outcome? If I wanted to create a business right now, I would have to sit down, write a pro forma. What am I selling? What am I marketing? How am I going to do that? What are the choices I need to make to increase sales? I go through all those steps. The fact of the matter is, every choice we make has a consequence. Are the consequences of the choices you're making consistent with the goal you're trying to achieve? So if it's a weight goal, how is your movement? How is your activity? What are you doing with food? Take a conscious look. Write it down. Write a little thing down of what it is you're trying to achieve. And what is it going to take to make that happen? And then take a look at the choices you're making and the consequences of those choices. And are those consequences consistent with that goal? If they are, I applaud you. God bless you. If they're not, then it's time for all of us to put the big boy pants on. Because no one's going to do that for any of us. No one's going to do it. So it comes a point where we have to consciously take a look at our lives and say, is this bringing me closer to what I'm saying I want to achieve? Because if you tell me you want to be thinner and leaner and healthier and fitter, and all the choices of your day are taking you away from that goal, comes a point where you have to reevaluate the consequences of what you're choosing to do. And we can all do that with more consciousness. And that's why with lifestyle choice and change, it's really about evolution. It's not good and bad. It's not religious. I did that bad thing or I did that good thing. It's about, are my choices consistent and congruent with the goals that I'm trying to achieve? And if they're not, how can I get help or insight or support to find out what I can do better to give myself the chance to achieve that goal? And I think if you do it that way, it becomes very hopeful and it becomes very positive, and you emancipate yourself from the slavery of these fast food fast food diets and fast restricted programs and all these things that may give you the opportunity to lose a few pounds in the moment, but you wind up mortgaging your health future in the process. We want to not only create healthy weight, we want to create health in general. So it's about how can we be a healthy, integrated person while creating the body image and the health outcome we would like to achieve. And we can all do that better, but there are forces that pull you away from that. And the only way to address them is consciously look at them and then make the decisions in your life about how you want to change what you're doing.
Yeah. I just want to, Dr. Frank, read a few comments from the live viewers.
Yeah.
Chris says, this is the clearest, most supportive talk I have heard for a long time. Nancy says, me too, Chris. This is awesome. Christelle says, I'm so glad I clicked on this interview. New fan of Frank Sabatino. He's awesome. Deborah says, amazing interview. Jean says, he's awesome. Barbara says, this is very helpful. So if you guys like Frank, like I like Frank, and you want to spend, at 6 weeks with him, he has created an amazing new course that I'm going to give a link for very soon to register that is called Lean for Life, the Science of Effective Weight Loss. Can you tell us a little bit about why you created it and what it will be like? It's 11 modules, and it's amazing.
I created it because of some of the things we've addressed tonight. Too often in the weight loss story, the focus is only on calories in or calories out with activity. And we're not looking at the whole human being that's involved with this issue of regulating weight and health. And so we want to address the idea of, yes, food. It's all about the food. What is that food program that's really in our best interest? But then what part of the program is involved with how can we improve activity to help that process? How do we look at what we can do about sleep? How about these factors of addiction? I even have a whole section on environmental toxicity because we now know that the chemicals that are being used as sprays in food and things that are being marketed are what we now call obesogens. They're chemicals that foster the outcome of obesity. So I've created this very complete holistic picture, this kind of story that incorporates all of that. What's the hormonal base, the activity component, addiction component, stress, sleep, environmental, addiction, because we need to look at it from the standpoint of what makes us human beings. And all of those pieces are part of who we are. And I find in all the years of counseling people that when I share that information, people have a set of tools that make it almost impossible for them not to be successful. It gives them the tools to take that closer look at their own lives and do things in a very hopeful way that give them tremendous results and success. So I'm driven by that really, in watching people with weight issues almost 40 years and helping thousands of people achieve healthy weight and body images by incorporating all the pieces that are in these modules. And I tried to present that in a very straightforward way, and I think I have. And not only are we going to have those modules, but as part of those modules, as you know, we're going to have Q&A on every one of those modules, which will be modules in themselves. So people are going to have all that feedback, the ability to ask questions, the ability to really fine tune what they can do at home to create a really hopeful outcome of health and body image.
Right. And for less than $100, they get 11 modules basically. And we deliver the lectures as one, and then each module has a Q&A with Dr. Frank based on that module, plus a bonus one at the end where we're going to wrap it all up. And it starts next Tuesday. So I hope you'll click on the link and check it out and consider registering, because this is phenomenal material that many of you have not heard, at least not delivered this way and this in depth. So thank you so much. With just many comments, Janice says, love him. Bruni says, great talk. Sherry, he is so clear and concise. And we'll end with the comment from Jean. He also has beautiful eyes.
Well, I want to thank everybody that viewed into this. Really, it's been my pleasure to be here. I love interacting and hanging out with AJ and sharing this information with you all. And I hope I see you through those modules, because I think it'll really change your life. I really do.
Absolutely. And I look forward to being in the class with you as the moderator. And thank you so much for your time, Dr. Frank. And thank all of you for watching. Take care, everybody. Bye.